Yeah, thanks for having us. So just to introduce myself, Gwen Brassine from the nature team in Arup, previously known as the ecology team, so go under ecologist. And Austin, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Austin. Been with Arup for just over 15 years now, so I've seen a lot of comings and goings and different policies and different legislation, of which this is obviously a very interesting one. So looking forward to discussing with you guys further on this topic.
So we'll just go through a bit of a whistle-stop tour of Biodiversity Net Gain, often called BNG. And then we'll just take some questions at the end. But if you think of them, just drop them in the chat, and then we can go through them at the end. Good. Austin, didn't change. So just what we'll be going through. What is it? What are the principles? How do we deliver it? And what can you do? So on to the next slide. So Biodiversity Net Gain, why is it there? Why is it important? So internally at Arup, we're aiming for all of our projects to have a net positive impact on nature by 2030. This is generally the movement that most companies are adopting and moving towards. So stated by the G7 leaders in the 2030 Nature Compact, our world must not only become net zero, but also nature positive for the benefit of both people and planet. Only in this way will we achieve a safe, resilient, and equitable future for all. And going by Inge Andersens, the executive director of the United Nations Environment Programme, he's stated that for far too long, humanity has paved over, fragmented, over-extracted, and destroyed the natural world on which we all depend. Now is our chance to shore up and strengthen the web of life so it can carry the full weight of generations to come. And if we go by anything that's happening in the news at the moment, see the massive wildfires, fires, the droughts, extreme temperatures, everything's linked to climate change. So this is the movement we're going towards, try to reduce heat, reduce the amount of pavement, and looking at a more natural environment within our cities and outside. Next slide. So how does BNG support this? BNG is the government's approach which aims to leave the natural environment in a measurably better state than the one we found it in. Through relatively recent legislation, it will become mandatory for majority of the development projects to have this. So that's in November, as mentioned, this year. So it provides opportunity for developments to generate long-lasting benefits, leaving biodiversity in a better state than before. And the BNG metric audits and accounts for biodiversity losses and gains to ensure a minimum of 10% gain in post-development. Looking at the last option on the screen, we have a bit of nature, construction, development is there, nature's still there, enhanced, and nature within the development, and that's how we achieve net gain. Very simplified, that's the gist of it. The next slide. So what are the drivers for BNG? It's been firmly in the political agenda since 2011, but a major shift in the way we consider measuring and mitigating for biodiversity in the planning system first came about in 2018 with the update of the National Planning Policy Framework. it goes by NPPF, which specified the project should result in a measurable net gain for biodiversity. So this effectively translates to a quantifiable demonstration that the project will leave the site in a better state than it would otherwise do. Following on from that step in a change in the way that we think about accounting for biodiversity is the key piece of legislation, that is the Environmental Act from 2021, which has been in the pipeline for a while now. But after this date, so in November 2023, all projects passing through the planning system, with the exceptions of the national significant infrastructure projects, will have to demonstrate this measurable quantified net gain in biodiversity. There's a couple of key elements in the Environmental Act that project managers and designers need to be aware of. Firstly, is that the gain needs to be measurable. You might have picked that up after a few times of mentioning it. And that's using DEFRA's biodiversity metric. So the most current iteration is the version 4.0. The minimum net gain needs to be 10%. This is to be achieved for each of the three constituent parts of the metric. So these are the area-based habitats, the linear units, and watercourses. And these will need to be done individually. The proposal will need to be outlined in a net gain plan or assessment, which will need to go through the planning authority for approval. And the habitat creation enhancement delivered will need to be managed and monitored for a minimum of 30 years. BNG should always be delivered on site, and when not possible, off-site, or at least then as a last resort through a biodiversity credit scheme for the local planning authority. Next slide. So next, I want to introduce you to several of the key principles and mechanisms by which we should be looking to integrate BNG into project practices. Before I run through this, I just want to point out many of these actions are already common practice and have resulted in numerous existing schemes and projects to be beneficial for biodiversity, both within Arup and in general. But the shift for the quantification of impacts and gains really puts a spotlight on the importance of carrying through these actions. So the first is to seek technical biodiversity expertise. It's crucial that an ecologist leads the assessment of the baseline and helps to mold the post-construction proposal, which informs the BNG calculations. Okay. Secondly, it's absolutely vital to consider the mitigation hierarchy to avoid the impacts to especially high-value habitats, either through an optioneering on the site location, which I know is not always something that we have any control over, or through the integration of the habitats within the design, which is where we can really have a big impact. So to demonstrate this really is a loss of 1 hectare of mature woodland would result in having to create about 10 hectares of equivalent woodland. And this is even more so if it's offsite, with and the resulting management of that woodland need to last for at least 30 years. So it's quite clear that we would try to avoid as much as possible. This is more cost effective and also avoids a lot of risk. The third and also fourth point is the integration of appropriate BNG practices as early as possible into the project. So speaking to a ecologist, internal, external, whoever you know, but also engaging in the relevant stakeholders who are going to be increasingly important as we deliver the BNG, given that long-term commitment for sourcing suitable land and then the management and monitoring of that land. So these stakeholders can be fairly varied, but for example, landowners, managers, conservation organization like the RSPB and wildlife trusts, council ecologists, and as well as public users. We have an example where we've worked with Environment Agency, and it's shown that securing land for BNG can take up to 18 months, mostly just negotiations. So it's quite important to think of that in your project timeline, and working with your client for that. Then the fifth point is pretty key, and that is following best practice, pretty obvious. In the quantitative output of the metric, it's obviously a percentage figure, but there's not much point in doing this if the proposal that sits behind it is not robust. So if you don't integrate the holistical BNG practice with the rest of the project, it needs to be coherent and work for the environmental networks and the operational duration of the project.
I can see that they've come through. Yeah, if I have any problems, I'll let you know. But I can see that they have come through and emails come through. So
I'll carry on. So to this end, the BNG good practice principles, you can see there, these were published, and when submitting for planning, these are really important to demonstrate how the project aligns with these principles, to show the gains in the metric. Next slide. So I thought I'd go through an example. This is a project in Windlesham. It is an upgrade and redevelopment of a site through the partial demolition of an existing building and creation of new habitat within the landscape. So the main aim was to focus on sustainability and the well-being for staff that will be working there. It is an old manor that was converted into a research facility, which had a very intensely manicured landscape surrounding it. So the first map shows the calculation of the baseline using UKHAB, which is the system that is needed for BNG. And through some fairly easily implemented design, so retaining the high value habitats such as the woodland and the meadow grassland, as these are very difficult to mitigate for. We were able to achieve a 10% increase and a 100% increase in hedgerow. And that is the reason why we need to look at the holistical picture and not just the numbers. So there is no hedgerow on the site currently. Adding only 6 meters of hedgerow gives you a 100% increase. So it's very important to look at what you want to create rather than just working with the numbers and make it work for you. So I will just share my screen now. I can. Let me know if that works.
Yeah, that's up, Gwen.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So just looking at the calculator would be useful to see what it looks like and how it works. This is the example I showed earlier in Windlesham.
Sorry, Gwen, this calculator, is this Arup's or is this the one that's provided by DEFRA?
This is DEFRA. So all the BNG calculations are carried out
Right.
through this one. You'll see it is the version 3.0. It's an old project. Current iteration is 4.0. So the way it works is we need to make sure that the trading summary is satisfied. So that means that all the types of habitats that are being lost are being compensated for like or better. So that needs to be satisfied. Here we calculate the baseline. We put in all of our habitats that we have recorded on site in hectares. We put in the condition, how important it is strategically for the area, and then it gives us the total number of habitat units. Another section here, areas retained, which means that you can see that only 2.18 area is lost, as the rest is either retained or enhanced. Then habitat creation, which is the post construction. We add in all of our created habitats, and that needs to match up to the number of hectares that are being lost in the pre-construction, so 2.18. Add in everything, give it a condition that is agreed with the client, what they're willing to do. So that will be included in a landscape management plan, how they're planning on achieving these conditions. And that will assume specific species mixes that will all need to be accounted for. And that gives us the number of units. When we look at hedgerows, which is the linear calculation, see only 6 meters.
Well, Gwen, there might be an issue with your sound of your mic. It's just gone all sort of warbly.
Can you hear me now?
We can not. Well, we can. I can hear you, but it's. I don't know, for some reason it's not clear. Yeah, it sounds like you're underwater, doesn't it?
It's a bit muffled.
Yeah. Oh, that's better now. That's better, Gwen.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better. That's better. Just a little chortle helped.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is the 6 meters of hedgerow, which is giving us that 100% of hedgerow creation. If we had a river, that would be calculated in the river units. So very important to be aware that these are different criterias that are individual and cannot be added together to get the numbers that you want. Okay, that's it on that. Austin, if you want to share with him.
Sure, let me do that.
There's Austin, there is a question from Seb, which sort of is more of addresses a wider issues in terms of how developers are reacting to this new legislation. I don't know whether you've seen that question. Seb, I don't know whether you want to come off mute and actually sort of ask it.
Yes, it's an interesting question. I was having a quick look at it. Gwen might have more information on what this secondary legislation is, but in all honesty, I think it's a bit of a cop out, really. You know, we understand why we need biodiversity net gain. Why we need to measure it is because there is a crisis right now, and for people just to say that, well, it's going to reduce our profits, it's going to be difficult to do. Quite frankly, they just need to get over it, you know. And to be honest, that's what we've told our clients. You know, they have a duty, if you're developing, to deliver enhancements regeneration for biodiversity. We can't say just because there's a 30-year management plan that's attached to it that's going to be an issue. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of these 30-year management plans, as long as they're written pragmatically, you know, they shouldn't be a big issue for the developer.
Well, I suppose
So,
it's just how they are managed, and how they are, well, yeah, effectively how they're managed and how they're held accountable. Because, you know, I listened into a webinar on PNG from the journal, and the legal guy that was talking is like, there are still massive uncertainties. So everyone gets the principle, but from a developer perspective, especially the big guys, I mean, we've had the big guys on previous webinars, and some are doing more than others. Obviously, they just set out to do the minimum. And then when it comes to this, there was even a lady on this other webinar from one of the what do you call them? The offset companies. So they're actually sort of one of the entities that are allowing you to buy the credits. And so developers can do that, and this is where the regulations aren't clear, Seb, as well, because, you know, yes, there is a duty for people to do it, but also you've also got the local authorities want to ensure that any gain is actually, the beneficiary is that local authority. But then equally, the regulations and legislations, it appears you can offset it. So there's a political issue, there's a duty issue, and even in some aspects, is the actual development site itself the right site to embrace all of this new biodiversity? So it is challenging. But yeah, I get that point. I get both angles.
I think for the larger sites that require an environmental impact assessment, so that's an additional piece of legislation that controls that, because you have to follow the mitigation hierarchy. So offsetting is as Gwen was saying earlier, offsetting is the final step that you do there. But, you know, even for smaller schemes, it's for the local authority to police that and not just take the easy option, which is say, okay, do whatever you want on the site, and then offset by buying a farmer's field. You know, because as you suggest, that takes away that green space, that potential biodiversity space from that location, and sites it somewhere else that might not be good for the local people. You know, you're not getting your access to nature then.
Because even at the moment, without the enforcement of requiring a 10% net gain nationally, the national legislation, we are doing biodiversity assessments regularly, and most local authorities expect either measurable net gain or 10% increase. So even without legislation, the local authority will still be expecting that and will be enforcing that. So
it's likely they'll request more as well. I mean, it's likely they'll be going for 20%.
It's very possible, yes. So it's just that local authority have their own biodiversity action plans, and they're wanting to see that within their environment, and make sure that those natural spaces are benefiting their people rather than going elsewhere.
I mean, it is interesting that, as Seb, you say about, you know, the 30-year obligation, and, you know, how that affects market value. From a lot of work that we've done, we've seen that having something in place that guarantees the habitats and the landscape on the site is actually a positive thing, and can actually add value as opposed to negatively impacting market value. Very easy to see that in London, the Wild West End, for instance. Property prices, rental prices have all gone up by virtue of the fact that there's a greener, should we say, management plan in place. So I think people just need to get their head around it, quite frankly. Cool. I don't know if that answered your question, Seb, or if we, I mean, quite happy to carry on towards the end, because it is a very interesting topic, and from Gwen and I's point of view as ecologists, it's nice to discuss these sorts of things to see how we can improve things for architects, for developers, and our clients.
Yeah, I suppose it's just it's as you've got the need, and then you've got the legislation, and it's making it, and I suppose where the legislation comes in to it as well, it's making it as easy as possible for all parties to deliver on the ethos.
Yeah, exactly
because,
that.
And I suppose not everyone is going to think, let's get on with it, and therefore, in order for people to at least have the chance of getting on with it, you make it as easy as possible for them to do so. Yeah, I think that's where we'll probably have the challenges in the next few months, whilst they're still trying to finalize things. Because if we do look at it from the other aspects, there are probably a number of burdens that developers would see them as burdens, and they need to be persuaded, but they also needs to be as easy as possible for them to adopt this legislation.
Yeah, and that's always been the same. New legislation comes in all the time, and people adapt to it. So I think it's just one of those aspects that you have to adapt to. But you are right; it needs to be made easy to actually adapt to. Cool.
So there's another question here from it's more of it's a question from Al O'Donnell. At the moment, am I right, Gwen? This legislation is just pertinent for England, but the devolved nations, they might. I assume they're going to be looking at this as well.
Yes, it did. Some of our colleagues in Scotland are using the metric in Scotland at the moment due to a lack of other options. But one, as far as I know, one is being developed that will be better suited for the Scottish environments. And they found that their clients, even though they're not required to do it, are asking for it. So there's definitely a very good movement there that people are aware that it's likely to be coming, and they want to be ahead of that game.
Cool, thanks. And sorry, guys, I've just interrupted you with these points here. So if you'd like to, I don't want to take time away from your presentation.
Right. It's good to have questions.
Good questions, yeah. We'll carry on. Awesome. Next slide. Next one after that. So this project, in the middle of that woodland, they've had a very large main badger set, which they aimed to keep, and were very proud of. So they asked to have some camera traps put on the sets so that they could use the footage for their good news stories for their staff. And also, whilst construction is happening, monitor those badger sets, make sure that they're not being disturbed, as they are a protected species, and also use the footage in the toolbox talks with the construction team. So those have been really useful and overall a very good news story for the project. Next slide. Let's try to keep it a little bit quick now. This is an example on South Bank in London, just by the Waterloo station. You can see in the corner there. This project looked at trying to figure out what is the baseline and how can it be improved for the local people and biodiversity. So ensuring that when the project designs it, it is going to be achieving a net gain. So if we look at the next slide, you can see the plans that were made. It's retaining the high value habitats, so the few existing green roofs and trees. It's creating high value habitats, meadows, biodiverse green roofs. It incorporates water and biodiverse river walls. So very ambitious and creative designs. It shows a legacy, great for British habitats in an urban space, and it keeps the gains within the site boundary and is great for wildlife, people, and also flooding in the area. So next slides, just a summary of the opportunities and challenges that we've come across in the past. The main opportunities includes the nature-based solution, which is a relatively new buzzword that we are hearing all the time these days, which is great. This to incorporate in design issues, so planting and deadwood in watercourses, slowing water to reduce flooding risks, and improving water quality. Perhaps you can look at introducing some beavers upstream if you're feeling brave, and supporting the ecosystem services, so pollinating, the clean water, soil erosion, flood regulation, increasing the natural capita of a site, which is a great asset for the client. It also feeds into the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It engages the stakeholders, it gains the support for the project locally, and helps secure planning. It's a multidisciplinary approach. So it works with people within your team, within your company, as well as externally. It's got great technological advances, auto-filling metrics, the remote sensing is being used, and it's also encouraging the innovative designs to provide mitigation generally. Negatives, or challenges rather, I'd say. It requires clear communication in-house and with your client, as well as stakeholders. You need quite a lot of training and awareness, as upskilling your team or client. The space is limited, so where available, some sites can be quite constrained, and it makes designing quite tricky. It is then overcome by innovative designs, really, and being involved with the designer from an early stage so that we can run multiple iterations of the calculation. Some sensitive projects, so I don't know if you have any defense infrastructure. It can be quite limiting in how we can change the habitats or manage the sites. And some incompatible data sets, which has been quite a tricky one, working with GIS and calculating areas, and working with architects who tend to work in CAD mostly. Just making sure that the areas that are being influenced are exactly the same as the areas that are as a baseline. It's quite essential to the calculation. Yeah, so next slide, really, what can you do? Probably just reiterating the same things I've been saying, but early consultation and onboarding, collaborative working, appreciate the challenges, and think of new designs, and most important, provide robust, compatible data sets so that we can work with you. I'll hand over to Austin now.
Cool. Thank you for that, Gwen. Let me just get my own screen up. I'm not going to talk for too long because I'm conscious of time, and it'd be good to have some questions.
Sorry, Austin. Gwen, do you need to stop sharing in order for?
No, that's right. I was sharing anyway. So
of course, yeah, of course.
That should be fine.
Of course.
There you go. Okay. So I just wanted to reiterate, the actual need for biodiversity net gain. Whether we're building a bridge in Bogota or a redevelopment in in rugby. You know, as practitioners, we all have a duty. You know, you see there that UK architects declare climate and biodiversity emergency. Engineers have done the same. I know Arup have. I think, you know, it's not just something that people should be saying. It's something that people should be acting upon. And we're all, I think we've all got a duty to act on this. It is very, very important. It's interesting that so part of our work at Arup that I'm particularly involved in is reviewing planning applications for the old Stratford Olympic site for the London Legacy Development Corporation. So we see a lot of planning applications, and I review the ecology sections, but I also review everything else as well. And it's quite interesting to see that the amount of weight within the DAS, you know, the design access statement, it never fails to amaze me how much page time or airtime is given over to contextual information on how something should look, and that's fine. People want to know how things are going to look, but more often than not, the biodiversity section is tiny, never more than even a couple of paragraphs, and it's normally tucked away within the landscape section. I think if people are going to be meaningfully delivering biodiversity net gain, that probably has to change. And every now and again, I do review an application that is stand out, and those are the sorts of ones that tend to go through the planning system a lot more easily, because everything's holistic. The engineers have spoken to the architects have spoken to the ecologists. Landscape architects are all involved with ecologists, engineers, infrastructure engineers, and it's a smooth process. Where it tends to fall down, and as Gwen has been saying, is when we don't get early engagement. You know, you can't deliver biodiversity net gain by just simply getting a green marker pen out and drawing some trees on your plans. It has to be integrated. It has to be within the actual design. So obviously, a good BNG is going to help your client with their planning conditions. In my mind, certainly from what I've seen, it does increase the saleability of properties. I mean, we can come back to whether the 30-year management is too onerous for some people. Clearly, some people do find it very onerous, and that was interesting to know. I think what BNG is starting to do, and I've been banging on about this for years, is it creates a level playing field for architects, for developers, for our clients. Previously, you know, there was no incentive for any one developer to actually go above and beyond and deliver biodiversity net gain, because their argument was if they were doing it, but the company down the road weren't doing it, then the company down the road would be more efficient, and be able to sell their properties for potentially a cheaper price or maximize profits more. But now everyone has to conform to biodiversity net gain, or as of November, hopefully this year. It creates a more level playing field. You know, people know what they need to do, and in my mind, certainly, it's just a question of adjusting your budgets on projects accordingly. I think once that happens, you know, it's going to make life a whole lot easier for many people. Greenwashing. I know it's a bit of an extreme slide to show, but I have seen similar things. Amenity grasslands isn't much good. It may get you some points, but not as many as you would want from a scheme. So, you know, if you get your local ecologists involved, they can really jazz up your landscaping, so it's fully delivering on BNG. This is going back to the first comment we had about the 30-year management plan, and clients and developers wanting to jump straight to the offset option. Certainly under EIA, that's simply not possible. And I've been with clients who have tried to do that, and I've advised them that it's really not going to work. And certainly when you talk to the competent authorities such as Natural England and so on, they won't let that through either. You have to try as hard as you can on your site to actually deliver BNG. Clearly some sites it's very, very hard to do that, particularly when you're in greener, more rural areas. It's always going to be harder to deliver BNG, always.
I think that's where there needs to be some clarity, though, because if the legislation sets out that you can achieve BMG through a number of steps, and the fifth step, I mean, I think the fifth step at the moment is buying credits from the government are going to make credits available, which they've already said are going to be priced very highly in order to disincentivize people from taking the easy way out, as it were. And then prior to that, you've got a bunch of habitat banks that do already exist that could form part of the basis of achieving BNG. But then, so the framework exists and it gives people the options. So I think that's where, but then if some of the bodies, the interested bodies and the responsible bodies are going to be frowning upon certain plans, that's again making it easy for people. It's like, what can you do? What is expected? Because because if the framework and the legislation sets out that you can do one of 5 things, but then some planning authorities and some responsible bodies are saying, that's not good enough. It's like developers need to know what they can do. Some of them will surpass that. Some of them will look to improve upon that. Again, people we've had on Meshwork webinars in the past, we tend to invite people who are already sort of setting the agenda and surpassing the bar. So, but it's making it as easy as possible for those that are just looking to do the minimum to understand how easier it could be to surpass those minimums. But at the moment, it looks like they can offset.
Okay,
so it's
not clear then. Is that what you mean?
Well, that's a question I have. It's not clear to me. And I may not be a representative audience member. I'm not saying it's not clear from you. I'm just saying as the system, it doesn't.
I mean, this is what is very interesting for us is to know things like this. That it's not clear. I mean, I guess it's clear to us because we work in this all the time.
Yeah.
But it is very interesting to hear, so, it's, would it be useful if design teams, the very first thing that they have is a rundown from their incumbent ecologists to go through exactly what their options are? Would that make things easier?
Well, I think also going back to the point that's been made several times about engaging with ecologists early I mean, with the legislation now, that has to be done. It's almost not a wish. It's not like, oh, this could be done, or we advise is like in order to achieve this, it looks like the process now is ensuring that this has been started out. Seb, did you want to ask a question, probably more eloquently than I?
You might be on mute, Seb.
He's not now.
Can't
Seb?
hear you.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Seb.
Yeah, just building on that, I think definitely that concept of having like that hierarchy of design principles early doors is really, really useful for an architect or a designer to have you know, like the urban greening factors, you can really quickly at a snapshot see what's going to help you significantly or materially or not. But I think also that it's all very well and good the ecologists and the design team are having a really robust, progressive and transparent strategy. But then if the developer actually sees maybe mid-project that there's a more financially viable option where they can offset because there become precedents or there becomes this greenwashing network, that you can already, I mean, at this conference I was hearing that already is kind of happening, even though the secondary legislation hasn't happened, which is pretty tragic, that they're already kind of set up to sidestep this. And I suppose it's kind of one of those things that the design team can have the best intentions, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's safeguarded. And that's why I was hoping that the secondary legislation can make it harder for that to become the default and really be exceptionally robust. But obviously I haven't had eyes on it yet, so TBC.
I think I would certainly hope, Seb, that any secondary legislation did make it more robust, because as you allude to, if people are sidestepping this, and I've heard, I was reading today that there are a lot of companies that are promising offsetting, but just not delivering it. So they're cracking on with their on-site designs, but they're not actually delivering on their offsetting promises. So that needs to be policed far better. And as this progresses, I'm sure it will be policed better, because there's going to be a lot of scrutiny on this, huge amount of scrutiny. So I think it might take a little while to happen. It may take a few years, but I think that it will be scrutinised, and if it's not more robust, then things will change.
Can I ask a follow-on question to that?
Sure.
About the policing. Another conversation I had with the same organisation was around the policing of it. Say at year 20, who's actually going to be in charge of policing whether or not a management strategy has been upheld? Is it going to be the local authority? How would they ever have the capacity to do that? And were they to discover that something wasn't upheld, what powers would they have to go back to whom? And what obligation would it be on, for example, the landowner to actually rectify the issues?
Gwen, have you got any thoughts on that?
It's so the way I see it, it's a bit like a health and safety issue, where if the builder is not delivering on a certain aspect and it becomes a non-compliant, then they will be forced to rebuild, recreate whatever it is they've done. That is often the local authority that needs to check that and enforce that. But as you said, there's a limit to what the authority can do and the number of people that they have available to do that. So there is a risk there. But I think much like health and safety, there's a risk everywhere. It's definitely a gap that will need to be addressed in as time goes on.
Again, it's a very good point, Seb, because how long will the monitoring go on for? Will it go on for the period of 30 years? And I guess for the larger schemes that are based on more sensitive habitats, you can see that there would be more scrutiny over the long-term use of the site. But for smaller development, you can see that slipping under the radar, can't you? That local authorities just won't have the finances and the manpower to actually police it properly. And to be honest with you, I don't know how that's going to be achieved, because it will be costly, and I would imagine that the local councils would want to be shifting the cost of doing that onto others.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah, I think this is all what's going to come out in the wash, because we can already see well, Seb said, sidestepping, because it's just if you give someone an inch, they'll take a mile. And again, it's not. I don't think, again, on this our platform here, we have an element of preaching to converted. So, you know, many of us already know, you know, we the idea of greenwashing is just like effeminate. So but it's the practicalities now of, I think this is a big step. It's a massive step with the introduction of it becoming regulations come November, and then for smaller developments come April. It's a huge step, and it takes away your point about how people just need to sort of get on with it. They do need now; they are obliged to. But the question is, it's like everyone pays their money, everyone has the plan up front. It's just like how can you police it going forward? And there's a legal entity as well. I mean, you know, normally developments, they're not leasehold, so you know, you've got to create a whole new legal entity now to hold someone accountable, because if someone has got to come back after, you know, an incident after 7 years, there might have been a flood or a particularly bad storm, someone's got to come back and sort it out. Well, there needs to be a legal framework in order to ensure that that's carried out. So, but no doubt they've thought of that, and then this will come out in legislation.
I mean, you can potentially see a lot of insurance companies making a lot of money out of this, can't you?
Yeah, they do their best not to pay out the best of times.
Best to take the money off you.
I started late, Austin, obviously for my own issues there, technical issues.
That's fine.
We better wrap this up in the next couple of minutes, because I know.
Yeah, that's fine. I can just flick through the last few that we've got. Just to think more about beyond biodiversity net gain, and it will evolve, but you know, we should also be considering you know, how we can sequester carbon on our sites through land use change. Don't forget that 2/3 of carbon is stored below the ground level in soil, and only 1/3 is ever stored above in plant life. So you've got to get the soils healthy, and that's leads on to my hating of amenity grassland. You don't get much carbon storage in amenity grassland. Wildflower meadow will give you a lot more carbon storage because of the mass below ground of ecology.
I think I'm right. By improving the soil quality, it's not even part. It doesn't even go towards your net gain either, I don't think. I mean,
it doesn't. It's separate. You know, carbon sequestration, nature-based solutions. You know, have got their local catchment of flood storage, which is a nature-based solution. You don't really get any good boy points for that. You know, perhaps that's something that in the longer term will be brought into, whether it's biodiversity net gain or whether it's environmental net gain. You know, environmental net gain is the next big thing. Mindful of the fact that sometimes environmental net gain doesn't always gel with biodiversity net gain, but sometimes you need to take a bit and give a bit and meet in the middle as much as you can. There's some questions that we've thought of to ask the guys that are still on the call, if we may. You know, what do your clients, what do they generally think of BNG? Are is it quite roundly that they don't like it, or do some of them like it, some of them not? What sort of feeling have you got?
Yeah, I think these questions now at this stage, I can post these within Meshwork, and we can have a follow-up conversation to get feedback.
That would be really good.
What people will say, or what people will feel. So I'll share that. If you can email me this presentation or Dropbox or whatever, and share it, and then I'll get it up along with the recording, and we'll try and get some feedback for you there as well, because yeah, be interesting to see who is driving. Obviously, a lot of people are driving it in order for it to get to a point where it's legislation. So yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting point in time with this, and it does represent an opportunity to make a big difference and improve our biodiversity. And now there's clearly a few challenges to follow up and address as well.
I mean, as with anything new, there are going to be, you know, bumps along the way. I mean, we haven't got time to talk about it now, but it's quite interesting to compare biodiversity net gain with the urban greening factor.
Yeah, Paul has just answered one of your questions. Paul said, we and our clients are generally finding it to be very positive introduction of a reasonably clear structure for improving biodiversity across a project. We're learning quickly now it's an intrinsic part of the early stages of design. Yeah, and I think that's the key part as well, because it will be an intrinsic part of everyone's early stages of design, because it's now what's demanded of you. It's not now just I would like to have this does change the goalposts, as it were. And I may be rather naive there, but obviously that's
I think you're right.
Legislation's been brought in for. And asking how are your clients? I mean, I was intrigued that South Bank projects, clearly enormous projects. I mean, who's driving that, and that's just a huge project, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really great, very public one, a very well known one. So some issues on flooding there, and trying to reduce flooding just for pedestrian walkways, really, by increasing the biodiversity. So having more suds, allowing the water to run down into the soil then, rather than having parts standing everywhere. It often stems from issues, and trying to use nature-based solution to provide a solution to that results in biodiversity net gain. And then client starts thinking, well, why don't we do a BNG? Then we can get those points and be able to say how much we're gaining. So it's usually one issue then brings in the BNG, because it's not a requirement at the moment. That's the way it tends to be introduced. Other ones, it's the local authority asking for it, and that's how it's introduced.
Okay, cool. Can I suggest we leave it here, because I'm just conscious of time now, and I'd like to thank you again for your time, Gwen and Austin. It's much appreciated and really interested. And like I say, I'll share this, and apologies to everyone for the chaotic start with the Zoom access, but I'm quite glad that people are nimble, and we got as many people on the call as we did, actually. So I appreciate you looking out for that. I think next week we have a session on whole life carbon, how that's measured, and that's with Mesh's own Richard Bowman. So that should be a good session as well. So no, thanks once again, guys. Really appreciate it. Thanks for taking up your time, and thanks for everyone for joining. And look forward to following up with you on another session, Austin and Gwen. Cheers then, guys.
Sounds good. Cheers, guys.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye now.
Cheers. Bye.